What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show are two cartoonists, and with Jonathan Plotkin and Pat Byrnes, we are speaking about how we can use the art of cartooning for triggering better ideas and maybe bad ideas that will lead to good ideas. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshops.work to download my free one-page summary. And now enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the show. Jonathan and Pat, cartoonists. So I hope we're going to have a few laughs today.
Oh man, that's a lot of pressure.
No pressure at all. And we're going to speak about cartooning, obviously, and about facilitation and online workshops and all of that. And maybe to warm off, the most difficult question in the beginning. Would you guys call yourselves facilitators?
I wouldn't. He would. I wouldn't. I would call the work we do the facilitator. I would call the cartooning itself the facilitator. Jonathan, however, is our master facilitator in getting us to that point. So I'm passing it over to you.
Well, thank you. I think it's maybe a semantical question more than anything else. Facilitation, in my view, is creating a space and collaboration, bringing people to a point where they can come to either a common understanding or maybe not a common understanding what their differences truly are. The device, of course, that we're using is cartooning, and the mind of the cartoonist, which is shaped and formed in unique ways to allow for that to happen in ways that have been, heretofore maybe not fully explored. But facilitation is something that I think that we are quite adept at doing and are part of our DNA.
Mm. And it's funny, Pat, that you mentioned that the cartoon itself is the facilitator, because in a previous conversation with a graphical recorder with Sunny, she said that the graphic recording actually was the third facilitator in the room. And I really like that.
Yes.
So.
Well, this was part of what started this whole enterprise. I have, despite my youthful good looks, I have 40 years of experience in professional creative one thing or another, designing cruise missiles, writing commercials, comedy, performance, cartooning, and other things. And I had this hunch that there was something unique about the cartoon, the gag cartoon, the thing that really was my center through all of it and helped me through all of it. And even in the things, even in designing cruise missiles, we did cartoon exercises to figure things out. It seemed like there was some magic there that was part of the thing and not just part of the talented people coming to that and doing that thing. And I've spent the last several years studying it. I mean, trying to get under the hood and see what makes this thing special. And what I found out is that the act of working in a cartoon, like a humorous visual verbal model metaphor, does brain magic that even I couldn't have suspected, despite my obvious prejudice.
So it's basically, if I understand you correctly, that the cartoon expresses the topic which is in the room and therefore makes the conversation about it easier in form of
partly
metaphor.
But it also reaches deeper into the person doing it. So when I say it is the facilitator, we're trying to get people to, in our facilitations, are trying to get people to tap into their own innate creativity. Just having them work in the cartoon form, drawing things, not drawing things literally, but drawing from their mind's eye, and with the freedom of saying this can look silly, and oh, what does this mean? And just like putting down lines and seeing where they lead you, it creates an emotional feedback loop where you get deeper into your own thoughts and feelings, and all those associative memories that we need to bring to creativity are triggered by our emotions. And so you're creating triggers and you're responding to them. And it's Jonathan often uses the term improv on paper. And that's exactly what it is. Your partner is what you're drawing, and your drawing gives you stimulus, and you give your drawing stimulus, and you create something, you co-create with your drawing. And so in that sense, it has this automatic tendency to facilitate our own creativity.
The drawings are also triggers that bring up ideas and memories, and that could not be done using the other senses. I remember back in the late 70s, I was going through a business program, MBA program in Boston, and I come from a real estate family, and I have a real estate background, but I'm also a cartoonist, of course. And I remember in 1978, a real estate company that was at the time renovating the Chrysler Building in Manhattan, the Chrysler Building being the iconic Art Deco 1930s building that has been, featured in millions of movies. They needed to find a way to get the world to understand that this was happening and be different from everybody else. So what did they do? Over a 3-day period, they took a full-page ad in the New York Times. The first day was just the tip, a cartoon tip of the top of the Chrysler Building coming up from the bottom of the page. The rest of the page was blank. It was a sensation. People said, "What is this all about? This is an expensive ad." Everybody knew just by an inch of the top of the building, this Art Deco building, that it was a Chrysler building. The second day, it was half the building. No copy, no text. Everybody knew that this building was special. Everybody was wondering, what could this be all about? The third day, of course, was the full building with the text, what they're doing in leasing. It was the fastest lease up in the history of a Manhattan skyscraper, based on the imagery that triggered the knowledge that this building was something different, something special, and caused that kind of attention. It was a fusion of those facts that always, to this day, has astounded me and brought me, to this point.
Yeah, it's the priming effect. People got to be emotionally invested on their own and bring all their associations to it and all their love for it before they even had a chance to be served up a message. Beautiful.
And there's one question that pops up to my mind. When I think of graphic facilitation or visuals, and from the interviews I had before, I learned that it's non-judgmental. Whatever you bring on paper just is, and whether you can draw, you cannot draw, it doesn't really matter. When I think of cartoons, I do sense that there is a judgment. There are good cartoons and bad cartoons.
Yes.
So 2 questions. What makes a good cartoon, and how do you get this sense of quality then into your groups that are going to work with this facilitator, with the cartoon, to produce something meaningful and funny that actually makes good quality? Or is it maybe then in the workshops not about the quality?
We are not teaching people to be cartoonists. We don't care about that. We're teaching people to use the discipline of cartooning to help them in what they do, whether it's real estate or cruise missile design or manufacturing or supply chain management. And I'll step back now. As far as judgment goes, I've heard in many a brainstorming group, like the first line is, "First of all, there are no bad ideas." Yes, there are, and that's number 1 on the list. There are bad ideas, but that doesn't mean we're judgmental about them. We actually love bad ideas. Bad ideas are awesome because bad ideas are still ideas.
And they lead to good ideas. If there are many of bad ideas.
Exactly.
They inspire.
That's because ideas breed ideas. And so you want ideas. And sometimes if you're trying to get ideas started, throw out a bad idea. Here's a bad idea, and jump on it. Enjoy, savor the badness of it. And there's another thing there. If an idea is bad enough, it's funny. And so,
yes, and then it inspires. If it's so bad, then it inspires someone to make something good out of it.
Yes, and the funniness actually, it tickles your brain, and the part of your brain it tickles, when tickled, makes you more open to insight. So and all this stuff is not because we're so magical as technicians. It's because this naturally happens in the brain when you do things like this.
So let me go a little bit further. When you said, okay, you're not teaching people to be cartoonists, but to use the thinking of a cartoonist or the aspects of cartoons. So what is it?
Well, there are 3 components, really, to a cartoon. You could break it down a million ways, but the way I said, you have the drawing and the humor, obviously. Those are the 2 things that people mostly see. But there's a third component that's really the backbone of most cartoons, and that is there's the story, the analogy, the metaphor. It's really, there's a metaphoric backbone. When people read a cartoon and goes, oh, that is so me, or that is so you, or this is my life. Even though it's not literally the case, that brings it into to their heart by way of metaphor. Those 3 components, interestingly enough, relate to the creative process. In creativity, you know that you need the divergent thinking and the convergent thinking, and those are different large-scale brain networks involved. So you have your daydreaming brain network, and then you have your focus brain network. And obviously, if you're a school kid, if you're daydreaming, obviously you're not focusing. And if you're focusing, you obviously can't afford to daydream. You're not often, wool gathering. There's a third network that switches between the 2 and says, oh, wait a minute. Okay, we got to focus. Oh, wait a minute, we need to daydream. Hang on there. There's something in that we got to look at. So there's this weird dance between these 3 networks. And usually it's like switch on, switch off, switch on, switch off. When you're drawing, you focus on what you're daydreaming. And through metaphor, you lead that daydream to meaning. And through humor, you bring that meaning into focus. And what you do is you create a loop that's more like, I draw it up as a Celtic knot because it's just that crazy a loop. The 3 neural networks that you need and ordinarily use in creativity in juddering alternation work fluidly with harmony when you are cartooning. It's everybody working together. And it's not diverge, converge, diverge, converge. You're doing it all at the same time. And that is something that one of the many wonderful things that happen with the brain when you're cartooning. And I'll stop this rant right now because I know that I'm going to have another opportunity to jump into it at another point.
Surely. And maybe a question to Jonathan, coming back to what Pat referred to improv on paper, because I would be curious how you juggle this focusing on daydreaming as a group.
Well,
how do you process that? How do you get the group to come up with this metaphor on paper and to improv on or with paper?
Well, there's a series of exercises, and Pat is the captain of those exercises. But the exercises tend to, from the warm up to the main exercises, which are currently a build a metaphor exercise. We bring groups into, in the case of our online workshops, into a Zoom breakout room. They will break out in teams, and they will work actually with movable objects, characters and props on top of backgrounds. These are all hand-drawn by Pat. And we will set up a challenge in advance. And part of the success of the workshops has been the preparation, understanding who our audience is, who we're dealing with, what the challenges may be. The last one we had was the challenges of COVID. What is, navigating through COVID? What's life like after COVID? But we had a great variety of people who, from different backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, from the arts, from business, but they all had a central idea of what it meant to them. When they got into the workshop and when they were focusing on the drawings, this is after they went through their own personal warm-up exercises, which Pat will describe in a moment. They were then challenged to agree among themselves as to the background, whether it was a desert island background or inside a cubicle of an office space, and then move characters, a vast variety of characters and props around to create their own visual metaphor to align with how they are interpreting the future to be. They can add captions to it. It's very interactive. They can actually change expressions on the faces of the characters. And what they end up with, given the time allowed, is actually a visual representation of what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And in a group, maybe it's a collaborative exercise. It can also be a very personal exercise. We send participants home with a home practice guide, which is a version of this that they can use. Because one of the main things that we try to make sure workshop participants understand is it's not an hour and a half, 2 hours of time with us. It's really giving them some tools so they can put in their own personal toolboxes to go home with and use at their place of business, at their kitchen table, to actually illustrate what they're daydreaming, to think about their problems, their opportunities in a way that perhaps before the workshop they hadn't really considered using. So,
amen, because practice makes habit. When you practice something, you've heard of neuroplasticity and how cells that fire together, wire together. Well, the more you do something, the more you get in the habit of thinking or doing that way. And a lot of cartoonists don't sit and doodle to come up with ideas because they've spent so many years doing that. They're doing that in their brain. It's like doing math problems. First, you got to figure them out slowly on paper and get to a point where you can do a lot of it in your head. A lot of cartoonists can do a lot of this in their head, but still, usually to complete the picture, they do have to work on paper. There's only so much you can hold in your head, no matter how much practice you have. But the more you practice, the more you can do in your head.
I would like to come back to the improv on paper. I'm a big fan of improv, and from what I hear, Jonathan, is that you really also use these building blocks. So the where is the cartoon happening? In which kind of space is it happening? Is it a spaceship or a kitchen table? And then the persons, and then the activities. So that's what I learned are the 3 building blocks of every improv scene. So would it be the same then for building a cartoon?
In the workshop or in the privacy of their homes or offices? I mean, it probably does.
In general. So what do you mean when you say improv on paper?
Well, improv on paper is not having any specific goal or direction. And I'll hand this over to Pat in a moment. But for instance, the line dance that we do at the beginning, the first exercise will be listening to music and a random, just doodling on the paper with no particular direction or understanding of what's going to happen, what's going to come out of it. And then the direction will be at the end of the 2 or 3 minutes of just random moving of the line on the paper, which is a very tactile feeling trigger device. We ask the participants to find a bug or a monster or an image that's within those previously randomized drawings or squiggles on paper. They can turn the paper upside down, they can turn it different ways. And what comes out of that is often, if everybody's working in the same direction, actual visual drawings, representations of these subjects. So it starts out as being very random, very kinetic, and actually then builds into something that is very real and has meaning to it. Pat, you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when Jonathan talked about just the line dance, we taking a line and you're just moving it to the music. And the idea is to try to engage, as if your hand was dancing and the pen was dancing to the music. So it becomes a very visceral, emotional, freeing experience. And then the act of discovering what is in there, what's hidden there, or what you can find. It's like interpreting clouds, but drawing it, saying that there's only part of that there. You have to find the rest. And there have been times when people sit there and stare. And I actually had to yell at one guy, say, "No, stop staring. Put your pen down on the paper and find it." And he put his pen down and he started moving. It said, just move it. Start there and move it and see where it leads you. And next thing you know, this thing started coming out. And the look on his face, it was as if this thing was there and he was discovering it. And the act, again, is the act of doing. Just like an improv. You just do. You don't think it through ahead of time. You react. And you do the next little thing. The TJ and Dave act with Dave Pasquesi and TJ Jagodowski are two of the most renowned improvisers and gods of it. And I've actually seen them perform, and yeah, they deserve that. So they talk about it's just the next little thing. I mean, they do a show, a full hour and a half show, like a play, 2-man show, and they walk out not knowing a thing, nothing planned, not even a prompt like improv usually has. They walk out, blank stage, blank everything, blank minds, and they just react.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
For me, it refers to what you mentioned before, the focusing on the daydreaming.
Mm-hmm.
So focusing on
Yes, when you focus on your line, you just say, see what's happening. A funny thing happens. Earlier this week, I had a nightmare that had bugs. And it was a bug dream, and we all have them. And I woke up, and my bedroom was pitch black, and of course, I open my eyes and I'm still seeing bugs. That's not a hallucination. That's just because there were bugs in my mind, in my imagination, in my dream. That dream visual was still in my eyeballs. When you see something in your mind's eye, it projects onto your visual cortex exactly the same way as if you were seeing it with your eyeballs. So to get rid of the bugs, since I know this, I said quickly, and I looked, and there's a sliver of a skylight that had some moonlight coming through it. So I went and looked at that, and I blinked several times so that I could impulse load my eyeballs with that light and burn out the bugs. And basically wipe that image from my mind's eye.
Well,
the fact that, yeah, exactly. And when you see cartoonists draw, very often you'll see them and if you say, give them a prompt, say, draw, and I actually did this with a guy at a Christmas party. It was Jason Chatfield, another New Yorker cartoonist. It was at the New Yorker's Christmas party, and we were talking about this because he's another geek about the science behind it. And I said, all right, we ripped the lid off of a pizza box because it's that classy at a New Yorker Christmas party. And he took his pen and I said, draw a shark on a bicycle. And so he just, his hand hovered over the paper, and did these couple little circle lines as if he was tracing in the air. And I said, there, that's the moment. That's when your focus network links up with your daydreaming network. Your mind's eye is trying to connect with your eyeballs. With what you see in your mind, you're trying to match it up with what's going to be on the page. And there's this spot in the air above a cartoon where the idea seems to be. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but recently I was grilling a bunch of other cartoonists about where their eyes go when they have an idea. Mm-hmm. And it came from, had read a book. Here, I'm turning my computer. There's a bookcase of some of the books that I was reading for this project. Some. And one of the very best is a book called The Eureka Effect. And it's by a couple of professors, one from Drexel University and one from Northwestern. And when I was reading this book, I'm thinking like, wow, this one is great. I mean, who are these guys? And I thought, one of them was from Northwestern. I'm in Chicago. And so I reached out to the guy and I said, I got 1 million questions for you. And he agreed to meet. And so we met, and I had a whole page of questions typed out in my backpack. And before I even sat down, he asked me a question. And he said, when you have an idea, where do your eyes go? Well, I had read the book. I know the answer. There's a brain blink just before an insight. And it's effectively your brain says, I need all the visual processing. And you know how you get when you're about to have an idea, you have that 1,000-yard stare and people are waving their hands in front of your eyes and you're not seeing anything? It's because your brain sucks all your visual processing away from your eyeballs. And people tend to look away, look off somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Not when you're drawing a cartoon. So in that moment, I had this realization. Well, it was a realization I didn't quite process, but I thought, wait a minute, this isn't right. I don't look away. Where do I look? He graciously led me to to what the answer was supposed to be. I knew what the answer was supposed to be. I felt very embarrassed, but it nagged me that it doesn't happen that way. When I'm cartooning, I don't look away. I'm looking somewhere toward the page, but where? And so I grilled a bunch of cartoonists saying, when you're coming up with ideas visually, where is it? And within a few millimeters or inches, I don't know exactly where, but it's somewhere in that place where my friend Jason was drawing above the page. It's some middle ground, an unfocused middle ground where your mind's eye matches up with your eyes. And it is really a focus on your daydream. And that daydream is happening also on the paper. So the paper is like an extension of your brain.
And is this different in cartooning than it would be from just drawing? And can we learn that?
Yes, it is different because cartooning is more of a thought process. Leonardo da Vinci would call it his cartoon doodling, his first thoughts. Primi pensieri. Everything sounds better in Italian. And it was the ability to play with loose lines on paper, even like water stains. He would play with them and he would find visions within them. Great ideas would come to him from that. This could take me off in a whole other direction. How it was part of Da Vinci's genius was handed to him in the form of paper. He was like the first generation of artists who had affordable paper and could do sketchbooks and things like that. So that's, the affordability and the availability of paper for doodling, for cartooning brought us the Renaissance. And Da Vinci did that. He would cartoon and he would draw. He'd see loopy characters and he'd follow people around town with interesting faces, and he'd draw there. He would get engaged in the emotional aspects of that, and that brought him a lot of inspiration. Same with Michelangelo.
I think if I just add a couple things here, I think that the doodling process is very important also. I think that the cartoon is a distillation of that doodling process. In other words, as these various networks fire together and come to that aha moment where it all comes together, there are profound consequences of all that. But the actual act of doodling, even as Pat described, the hovering of the pen over the paper, the moment that pen tip touches the paper and starts to move around, there is a reaction that even without any outcome that would even resemble necessarily a cartoon, it does provoke thought, and it makes the process, I think, even more profound, because you can sit there, and I actually teach a class in doodling to adults and to kids, the power of doodling. I was one of those guys with kids where I would have a handful of pencils like this in class, and I would be tapped on the shoulder by a teacher, sometimes whacked on the shoulder by my teacher, and the pencils would be taken away, and they'd say, "You're not paying attention." And I'd say, "Well, yes, I am. This is how I pay attention." And what I would be drawing or doodling was not particularly of any value. It was maybe odd marks or designs, but it was how I was listening. It was how I was triggering other senses to be better, more acute, and how I was processing information. In fact, to this day, I can't sit in a lecture or any kind of extended function without being able to doodle while I'm listening, because the listening part to me is so intricately attached now to the making of marks on a page. So what we try to do in the workshops is use the discipline of cartooning by elite cartoonists. You're looking at one right now with Pat, who have mastered the form and brought together through the science and through the technique and through the practice to a point where it's actually become a career. But the essential elements of that are profound in that they actually can elevate a human being's ability to do what they do in their normal day a little bit better, a little bit deeper, bring meaning to it, lowering inhibition, because it's a great inhibition lowerer. I mean, to sit there and to doodle with people and to laugh and to engage allows people to speak more freely, to show what they're thinking more freely. So what we said at the beginning of the conversation is that Pat mentioned that we're not teaching people to be cartoonists or to be, frankly, artists. We're teaching them to use this tool to be able to think and feel deeply about what it is that is impacting
what they're thinking and feeling. They can feel deeply about what they're thinking and feeling. Jonathan said the key word there is very like doodling, except engage. When you engage, when you're doodling to listen, that helps you process the information you're listening to. When you're doodling to engage in your own thought, it helps you listen to your own self and to your own inner workings, your memories, your associations. And so it's a more engaged form of doodling, and not just the decorative or mind-focusing kind of doodling. A lot of times doodling is just a way of blowing off nervous energy, and it helps keep you focused. Just that activity. It's almost like chewing gum. But it also provides a visual response. I have a daughter who sometimes doodles in her notes, and she can tell you where in that doodle certain concepts came up in class. Oh, it was when I was drawing this, that he talked about blah, 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 blah. So it becomes an association map.
Like an anchor.
Yeah. And it works only or like squirrels, they have a memory map in their brains for where they bury nuts. And so that's where that little nugget was buried.
And the good thing is that her classmates cannot copy her notes because they cannot make sense.
I actually got through graduate school exactly for that reason, that I had gone into an MBA program with no business background. I had entered the program my first day after spending 3 weeks in North Africa during Ramadan with some friends of mine who painted my arms with henna. I had long hair. I come to my first day. Everybody's in a blue blazer and a tie. I'm the only one that looks like he'd just fallen off of a camel. no one would pay any attention to me except for the foreign students because they were intrigued by me. Who is this guy? And one of them walked up to me. He was a friend of mine. I still am in touch with him. He's a Pakistani. He said, would you care to share your notes with us? We could use that help. I said, well, I really can't because my notes are hieroglyphics. I take notes verbatim, but they are peppered with my doodles and my drawings. I can remember every word that's said in a lecture, but I'm afraid that you won't be able to read these. However, I'm happy to come to your study group, sit in the middle. I will recite the notes to you verbatim. You can record them. We can discuss them. And it did two things. It informed this group. It was about 7 or 8 people from all over the world. It reinforced for me what it was that I was learning. But more important, they were a lot smarter than I was. And they were actually, it was all case study method in business school. They were solving all the problems as I was giving them the material to be able to work from that. And we became, in 2 instances, the top groups that first year of graduate school in marketing and in strategic planning, not because of me, but just because of the doodles between the lines of the notes. And it was it really triggered in me all the memories of having been slapped by teachers with rulers and told not to doodle, because here was an example of how I was actually scribing what I was hearing and being able to use that.
So how would you think that the ability to build a cartoon can help groups to better collaborate or to solve a problem? What are the building blocks that would make such a cartoon? Pat looks agitated.
Yes, I'm agitated. I illustrated a book on leadership that was for a leadership center. And the author of that book came back to me later and he said, I use these illustrations in talks all the time. And one thing that I find is that they're great anchors. Everybody who has all their semantic disagreements can agree on the drawing. The drawing holds a central metaphor where everyone can project their own thoughts and everyone can be right and everyone can be in agreement. Everyone can see nuanced differences and not feel that their different way of seeing it is threatened by someone else's different way of seeing it. They know that they have this common touchstone. They all see the big picture together. And everybody is united in that big picture while their individual differences are respected. Our individual differences in interpreting something like a metaphor, particular visual metaphor that we're all looking at, are an acknowledgement of the fact that we all have different experiences. We all have a different collection of stuff in our heads. And we all bring those differences to it. And that enriches us, like a violin section in an orchestra. Everybody plays that note a teeny tiny little bit differently. And everyone's instrument is a teeny tiny little bit different. But when they all play together, there's a richness to those differences.
To what extent can this then be misleading? Because if all agree, I can see situations where it's important that everyone agrees on the big picture, and then it's less relevant what each of the participants or people's interpretation is. But I also see situations where it's important to actually highlight these differences.
I think it depends on what if we're going back to workshops for a moment, what the intention of the workshop is. And when you're in a group of people, that group of people, by their very nature, are forced to collaborate. They're forced to, if not necessarily find common ground, but to find ways to, again, I use the word distill from their own experiences and their own references, some kind of a theme that is common to whatever the subject may be. When we did our last workshop on COVID, it was interesting that a couple of the groups picked the same background. They had 23 different backgrounds to pick from. couple of them picked a rickety bridge spanning a chasm between two cliffs. The metaphor there being, getting from, or the background metaphor, getting from one place to another over unstable ground, if you will. We would leave them to themselves to figure out how are they going to represent that journey. Is that journey hazardous? Is that journey going to be a successful journey? Is that something that is, does it provoke fear, remorse? And even though these different groups had the same background, they came away from the experience with a visual, concoction, metaphor of using what they chose as their props and characters, very different from one group to another. Now, individually, they may have all had their own ideas as to what they might have done if it was just them. But in that particular instance, they were, I think it was 4 or 5 people in a group. They were trading off, but doing it in a way that was not provocative, was not particularly, I guess it was safe to share what their feelings were, and they came up with a distilled version of what that challenge might be.
It is a very safe way to disagree. Mm-hmm. That is an important point. Especially when you're doing it in a humorous setting, mm-hmm. you can point out a really tragic flip side to the situation, and people can laugh at that irony, but at the same time go, yes, that is something we need to acknowledge too. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to accept a problem when you're laughing.
Yeah.
You can say, yeah, right. Because when you laugh at a suggestion like that, what happens is you've had an insight. Mm-hmm. You had this moment of like, aha, I thought of that. And when you thought of that, your brain naturally rewards you and say, yes, you're so smart. You did think of that. And so you can accept that because, mm-hmm. Because you get credit for that.
And when you laugh together, this creates trust just by instinct. So
Absolutely.
if you laugh about something although it's so true that you have to laugh about it because it's a metaphor, then it's easier to address maybe the underlying issue that is not laughable.
That gives you empowering. It gives you the courage to look deeper and say, what other problems could there be? Yeah. And that is very empowering for groups to say, yes, we can face anything.
I almost asked the question, what makes a good cartoon? But I'm actually more curious to hear from you, what makes a bad cartoon?
One that doesn't change anything. When there's no change. When it just says, this is what it is. Mm-hmm.
So the metaphor.
See the cat. Yeah. We have an operational definition of an idea. An idea is a thought that changes how we see. Mm-hmm. Something that just says, this is literally the situation, is not an image that changes how you see. It's just an acknowledgement. Yes, CAT, cat, that's a cat. It's not a cat in a hat. It's not any kind of cat meme. It's just there.
So how would you then transform a bad cartoon, which is basically just an image of reality and then not provoking, into a good cartoon?
Bob Mankoff has a perfect example of this in, I think it's The Naked Cartoonist, one of his books. He might also use it in his memoir. But it's a picture of a guy sitting in a chair from the side. And he says, this is not an idea. And then he takes it, and he takes that same image, and he turns it so that he rotates the image 90 degrees so that the back of the chair is on the bottom. And above it says, discount recliner. That's an idea. Takes the same image, and he changed it into something like, it is a discount recliner. A very simple thing, but it goes from non-idea to idea. Mm. that's an example of how you can take a bad idea and work with it.
And it beautifully links to the line dance exercise you explained before, where you try to see something that is something new in what was already there before by changing perspective.
Right before your eyes. Yeah. A lot of the most classic New Yorker cartoons are things where people look at and go like, oh, that's right in front of us all this time. Finally, somebody saw it. Yeah. I hate it. I hate it when I see a cartoon like that because I go, why didn't I think of that one? I love it too. It's mad respect for the guy that did it, but it's like,
Nice. Another question that I always ask my guests is, what makes a workshop fail?
Oh, I think there's any number of things. I think lack of preparation is probably the biggest. In our case, where we're dealing with corporate clients, not understanding who our client is, what their objectives may be. So there's no discounting the ability to spend the time necessary to understand who you're working with. The other is the technology, especially with this remote and this virtual world that we live in, making sure that everything from internet connections are appropriate. One thing that I've noticed in a lot of the workshops and other events that I've participated in, everybody has a different computer on their desk. They're either using a phone, they're using a laptop or a computer. Knowing where the camera is important, because the one thing that we're lacking, I think, we haven't really evolved yet as workshop participants and facilitators, is looking at somebody in the eye. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you're talking to somebody in the normal course of a day, looking at somebody in the eye when you're speaking to them is just it's what you do, right? This is the human connectivity that we have. So often you're like this, people are looking up, or you're just seeing the tops of their heads.
Looking in your nostrils instead of your eyes.
You have parts of people who are engaged, not engaged, the whole protocol as to whether people are sitting there in their pajamas or they're not maybe distracted. This isn't why necessarily a workshop would fail, but it's the elements that we try to be conscious of, especially the focusing. And I think the third is just a failure to listen. I think that in facilitations or in a workshop or I don't care whether it's the drawing board or any others, listening to what people have to say and giving them space to say it and to feel like they have a value having come to the workshop is important, and not turning it into a TED Talk or a lecture that is one way. In other words, letting that voice be heard throughout the event. And then from that, new ideas spring, and that's where the real collaboration comes, when people feel they're not inhibited from speaking their mind.
And if I could add one thing, or really just underscore one thing, when Jonathan said we need to understand what they need and what they want to get out of it or need to get out of it. When I talked about, the three brain networks, the ones diverging, the daydreaming, the focus, the one that to me matters the most, the one where things change, is the one that focuses on meaning, or it's actually called the salience network. Meaning is the most important thing, and it's often the thing that we lose. As a facilitator, you want to say, this is what things mean to me, and not focus on what things mean to you. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing we want to connect with most and help people connect with, saying everyone has their own sense of what's most meaningful to them. And we encourage people to find that and speak to that, connect with that. When life has meaning, when work has meaning, when a project has meaning, great things happen.
How do we find meaning? $1 million question.
Look for it. You be open to it. You acknowledge that it's there. Mm. It's just being open to it. too often we close ourselves off to it. And that's why we encourage people to play with metaphor. When you're playing with metaphor, you're playing with fire.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're trying to avoid anything meaningful and you start playing with metaphor and humor, you're going to fall into something that means something to you. And it's like, oh my God, I felt something. That if feeling something's dangerous to you, avoid this. Mm-hmm. But if finding something meaningful, it has any value to you, be willing to play, be open to metaphor. Metaphor connects you automatically to what's meaningful. And that's going to stir stuff up that you didn't know was hiding inside you. The exercise with finding the bugs and the snakes and the monsters in the lines, we're evolutionarily programmed in our genes, epigenetically. We are conditioned to look for what's meaningful, often threats. Bugs and snakes and monsters. There are people who have never seen a snake in their lives, don't know what a snake looks like, but have had nightmares about them because of all the millennia, the millions of years of conditioning, fear. Those fears were necessary to our species' survival. When you hear a rustling in the bushes, in the leaves, in the forest, you got to be attentive to that. We're naturally alert to those things. And so I'm giving away a secret here. That's kind of why we say look for bugs and snakes and monsters, because we're naturally conditioned to find those. And if we can find them and turn them into something funny and something that we can recognize, then we can look at our fears and find opportunities there. Problems can be opportunities. Because that snake could be danger, or that snake could be dinner.
Beautiful.
I'm ending on a punchline there.
It seems like it's the perfect kind of closing moment.
Yeah, I think also meaning.
The hour.
To find meaning, you have to start doing also, and that's what we try to do. Yeah. We try to set people off on their journey, because you can
sound like my mother.
Yeah, you can sit there and wonder what the journey ahead looks like, but until you take that first step, you just don't know. You can't find what the truth is in that journey. And the beauty of what I think that we have to communicate is that you can do these things sitting at your kitchen table. You can use these skills and you can use these tools wherever you are, on a subway train, your kitchen table, in your office. There's nothing technical about it. It is just in the doing, and as Pat said earlier, in the practicing. And, will it make you into a rock star or, the next president of the United States? Maybe. But what it will do is be able to give you a transformative experience with just a piece of paper and a pen.
Wonderful. Okay. As we are approaching the hour, if someone in the audience, for a reason that I wouldn't be able to explain, but still fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up, doesn't have time to listen to the entire show, what would you like them to take away?
Always carry a pen. You are not a full-grown adult unless you have a pen or a pencil on your person at all times. Because, or something to write on. You can even write on your hand. As long as you have a surface to make marks on, then you can think outside your own brain. And when you can think outside your own brain, basically you have a bigger brain. Just saying.
Wonderful. Jonathan, anything to add?
I would just agree with it. I think that's exactly right. That's I'll just leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your ideas, your laughs with the audience.
No, our pleasure.
And I will put your contacts and the website in the show notes so the audience can reach out to you whenever they need it. And I'm looking forward to hear more about your upcoming workshops.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.